So for the sake of Jolie, our new potential debater here, I will explain a little bit about what debate is. Debate is learning to do what everyone always does all the time correctly. Everyone always all the time does this thing badly, and they don't know that. Okay? So as we go about the world, no matter what our position is, no matter how much we think we should favor logic or feelings, or whether we should favor spirituality, or whether we should favor effectiveness, or whatever else we think we should favor, no matter what that is, we make our point through some kind of an argument. Even if we are arguing, we shouldn't use arguing to decide an issue. That's an argument. Everything we say in which there's any disagreement between people, anytime we are trying to inform people of something they do not already know, in fact, as well, we are making arguments. The issue is the vast majority of people in the world don't know what they are doing. Imagine that we were all walking, but 99% of the people were walking with their legs tied together. And you were the walker around, you see yourself, and occasionally you see one other person who knew how to walk without their legs tied together. It would be strange. You'd think people would learn to walk with their legs not tied together. But in reality, because it's debate and it's abstract and it's arguing, people can't see that their legs are tied together. They don't know that their legs are tied together. That's why when you're done with debate, it makes it so easy to run up and kick them. Because you know how to use your legs and they don't. Okay? So I want to make sure that you end up knowing how to use your legs, and I want to make sure you realize that if you do join this squad, you are one of a very slender percentage of people who will actually be smart. Okay? So as far as the scheduling goes, we have classes here on Monday, normally from 4 to 7 for public forum, and then we'll have an additional couple of chances to meet up remotely. I do tend to meet with students on GoToMeeting, which is it's like Skype kind of, and regardless, we will go into battle. The reason this is real is because you go into battle eventually and you either win or you lose. So, Jolie, do you have any paper of any sort? I know I don't expect you to have brought any, but if you do, we're going to talk a little bit more about this stuff, and I want you to start taking some notes too, so that you get the feel for how we roll a little bit, okay? And your mom can see it in action as well. All right, so that's the Fourth Amendment and the probable cause issue, specifically regarding the probable cause standard. And let's now talk about mechanism arguments as to why a given limiting principle, like the Fourth Amendment, ought to be either applied literally, applied interpretively, or stuff like that, because that's really the core issue here. All right, number one, Fourth Amendment is a limiting principle. It says, it sets criteria to be met before any action is permitted. Remember that this is consistent with the federal government's status as a government of enumerated powers. Enumerated powers, not enumerated limits. If it's on the list and it says you can do this, then the federal government can do it. If it's not on the list, they cannot do it. This is saying, here's something that's not on the list. You can't do it, but we're going to carve out an exception. You can do it if and only if, okay? So this is saying, the Fourth Amendment says, search? No, you cannot search. Except if you do this stuff. It sets a criteria to be met before any action is permitted. It's consistent with the enumerated powers. It's saying this is not one of your enumerated powers. This is, in fact, a right to be free from search. You have no power to search, inherently government. It's not within your normal duties to search. Search is not within your normal duties. So, passing laws about pirates, normal duties. Search, not a normal duty. You don't pass any laws, government, about search. You don't say the government should search this way or that way or the other way. That's already set up here. You can't search at all unless you do but. It's not within your normal duties. It's not one of your powers. Not an enumerated power. Instead, this is a criminal matter. It's criminal, not civil. It should come from a search ought to begin with a victim. My car was stolen. I think Joe has it. I'm pretty sure he stole it from me. Okay, well, go before the judge. Tell him your story. Alright, I guess that's a good enough story. You swear what you're saying is true, Eric? Yes. Alright, then you can go search Joe. And then they go search Joe. Yep, Joe has your car. Here's your car back. Okay? That's how it ought to begin. With a victim. Somebody calls and says, I've been victimized. My rights have been violated by another citizen. Not by the government. The state is subject... agents of the state. Let me put that. Agents of the state must function in accordance with the limits of the state. So, it might be okay for me to say to a parent, no, I'm sorry, I don't want your kid in my school. I can do that, right? I can say that because it's private. It's a business. It's up to me. The government can't do that. They can't say, oh, we don't want your kid in our public school. Your kid's bad. They have to let you in because they are representing the public. Everybody paid into the tax pool, so everybody gets to access the resource. Okay? Now, the state must function in accordance with the limits of the state, agents of the state. If I'm a cop and I'm pulling you over, that means I'm a sworn officer of the law. I have sworn to uphold the Constitution. Now, this Constitution that I'm upholding right now is not a very literal Constitution, is it? It's kind of some random interpretation of it. But it's important to remember that the reason why we have this limiting principle is because not because we don't want the government to do stuff to us, it's because we don't want Zaid to have the special ability to beat up Brandon and get away with it just because he has a gold star on his chest. Right? That's how we have it now. The cops can basically beat you up and get away with it because they're cops whenever they want to, unless you catch them on camera. You gotta film them, right? Then you get them. Then justice is served. Because even if they get away with it legally, they're pariahs. They're universally hated, which is a good punishment for them. Okay, so this limiting principle then requires us to consider what is the role of government and what ought they to do. Note, however, that there are different governing bodies. So we're going to talk now about incorporation. Originally, the Constitution was only designed to limit the power of the federal government. Constitutional incorporation. So, Constitutional incorporation. Originally, the Constitution only applies to the federal government. It only applies to the federal government because it's designed to maximize states' rights. Because back when it was made, the main concern was that states wanted to be autonomous communities. States wanted to be autonomous communities. States weren't worried about oppressing themselves because they were so small. Listen, boss government, I don't want you coming around here and telling us how to govern ourselves because there's only 12 people in here. We're not going to oppress each other. We'll be fine. You don't need to come keep an eye on us and make sure we're not oppressing each other. We're all cool with each other. You guys are way over there. You think you're boss of us, but you're not the boss of us. That's why we have this federal constitution to limit the extent to which you can boss us around as the states. However, population skyrocketed. Such that a state was now like a country was. Back when the United States started, each state was like a city is now, basically. And so cities weren't worried about, I'm not worried about the city of Temple City, enslaving me. The city in which I live is not going to enslave me, right? If I'm a white person in the 1700s anyway. The point is that back then there were very low populations. So you could rely on local control. Local control solves some problems. If the federal government is basing its decisions on what's best for the whole country, it might be bad for me and my local community. If in fact it's a good idea to prevent people from having easy access to arsenic, rat poison, let's say. Like we shouldn't make that super easily available because people might poison people with it. Let's just say that were a law. But if my local community has an issue with is filled with chemists, they're filled with chemistry people, and they're all doing various experiments on various poisons and making antidotes for them or something, then obviously my community is going to need a lot more arsenic than an average community. It might appear like, what the hell's going on with that community? Are they trying to poison the whole world? But actually, it's just a community of chemists who need a bunch of arsenic for their experiments. So you can see that local control solves some problems of centralized control. Centralized control is not going to be specific enough to a given local community. However, when you have a population that's so big, you no longer have states. States no longer equal local. Okay, so states no longer equal local. And what do you need to have? Well, you have certain state governments, states behaving badly. Which states? Which states behave badly? The South. The South behaves badly. Okay? When? After Civil War. Why? Because they kept wanting to stomp on black people. And say, okay, fine, you're not slaves, but you still don't have any rights. The federal government says, now, Louisiana. And then they say, okay, fine, you have one right. The federal government says, now, Louisiana. Okay, fine, you have 0 rights. No, you're going backwards, Louisiana. And that goes on for like 100 years. All right, there's 100 years of that nonsense until finally the civil rights movement happens. But before that, something happened that enabled the civil rights movement to happen, which is this: incorporation. The Supreme Court ruled that state governments have to obey the same principles as the federal government when it comes to individual rights. They don't have to obey the constrictions of enumerated powers, but they have to respect individual rights. Okay, so incorporation, states, that means states now have to respect rights. States must respect constitutional rights. It's the bill, stuff in the Bill of Rights mostly. And it made more clearly when this incorporation happened, now all of a sudden the federal government is clearly the boss. They are in charge of the states. The federal judiciary, that is the Supreme Court and other federal courts, can tell state governments what to do. And if they don't obey, we find out what happens. When did we find out what happens if they don't obey? It was in the 60s during the Civil Rights Movement when the governor of Alabama refused to integrate a public university to let black people go there. And so the president sent down the National Guard, the Army, into Alabama and said, Army, position yourselves outside the University of Alabama, and we are going to have the military escort black people into the University of Alabama to take classes. And that's what happened. The military was there. So who's the boss? Alabama or the federal government? Who's the one with the army? Federal government. Okay? When you bring your army someplace and say, yeah, you are, you're the boss. That means you're the boss. And then they do it because they have to. They have no choice. That's constitutional incorporation. Constitutional incorporation is relevant here for sure because it explains why a school principal might be held accountable to a federal constitutional protection. To a federal constitutional rule criterion to create an exception to a rights protection, which is what this is. It's very complicated, right? It's not just like, oh, we should get our rights protected or not. It's, ought we have what was written as a criterion to be met in order to write a warrant to search somebody, but has been interpreted down to mean a good reason to search somebody without a warrant. Ought we apply that new weakened standard to students instead of the status quo standard of nothing? In the status quo, you have no protections. Zero. So if your teacher or principal or somebody says, open your locker, I'm searching it right now, and you refuse, then they can just open it themselves without your permission, and or you can get in trouble for that. Now, that's an indication of a serious problem. It's a problem where we simply fail to respect the fact that just because some individuals might do bad things does not justify you doing bad things to all individuals, which is exactly what it is. If the principal searches your locker with probable cause instead of a warrant, he's saying, because you might be doing something bad, I get to do bad things to everybody. I don't even know if you are doing anything bad for sure, but I get to do bad things to everybody. People want to try to isolate these things into a single event. Oh, well, no, he's not going to do bad things to everybody. He's just searching one locker. No, he's setting the rule that I get to search whoever I want whenever I want. Yeah.
Doesn't it not matter because it's the school's property, so the principal gets...
It's your property as much as anybody else's. It's public property. It's a public building. They ought to be agents of the government, are subject to, as I wrote, that's why I put that thing up there, right? It's because agents of the government must be subject to the same limitations as the government itself. Why? Because otherwise, we misunderstand the nature of government. Government is not this building comes over and says, I am government. You must obey me. It's people who are acting as agents of the government, enforcing the protocols that the government has set in place. So if a principal of your public school comes and searches your locker, you should say to him, "Sir, you are functioning as an agent of the government, and under color of law, you are at risk of losing any shield protection you may have. You are knowingly violating my civil rights." Make him make the argument that current Supreme Court interpretations indicate otherwise. Make him make that argument. And then make him defend prioritizing convenient Supreme Court interpretations over the truth. That's how you attack that. Okay, so you are familiar with the constitutional law principle. Fine. You are aware, Mr. Principal, that in fact the Supreme Court allows this legally right now in the status quo. And so therefore you were all in favor of segregated schooling, right? The Supreme Court allowed that for a long time. Was the Supreme Court right about that too, sir? Would you like to see all the people of one race separated into a different section of school than the other? And then you have him relent, right? Because he didn't say anything about race at all. And now you've got him going like, I'm not a racist. Well, yes, you are. If you think you can arbitrarily apply the Constitution willy-nilly as you feel like it, you might as well be. Right? I'd love to see you guys. I'd love to see somebody try to search one of my debaters, a feisty one, not a cooperative one, right? Anyway. Yeah. So that's that little section. It's well past break time. Yeah, it's about 7 minutes past break. Let's take a little break. And Grace, you are fairly new to the squad. You came in last year, but I want you to express to her a little bit about the experience. And boys, I want you to be nice to the girls, please, and make them feel welcome. Okay? We've got some really, really, really beastly debaters here. Okay? Justin's coming along strong, but these three right here last year were all killing it. Brandon, Zaid, and Edmund. So
What happened to Lyle?
Why, he should be here today, I thought. Or I talked to his mom, I thought. I don't know where he is, but I talked to his mom yesterday or the day before or something. He'll be here. Anyway, they know what they're doing, and that helps the stronger a squad is, the more strong debaters we have, the better everybody else is. So they'll get good really fast because they'll see only really good debating, and then that's what they'll have to emulate. Okay? So this is a good group to be in. This is my strongest group. It's a smaller group, but you should totally join this squad.